And then I had to come out as a 16-year-old Christian to my 3 gay parents. And when I did, they kicked me out of the house.
Well, hey, Beat family, Alan Parr here. And let me just say, you all are in for a treat today because I've got a very, very special guest. And I don't even know what to call some of these interviews or conversations that I've been having. Maybe I'll call them pictures of God's grace, because we've had some amazing people on our show. And I really love to bring people who have these amazing stories, amazing testimonies of not only what God has done in their life, but through their life as well. And today is no exception. I've got a friend of mine, his name is Caleb, and I'm not going to steal his thunder. I'm going to let him share his testimony of what God has done in his life and his family's life, but I'll just frame it for you so that I can get you excited about this conversation. Caleb was raised by not only one, not two, but 3 parents who were actively part of the LGBT community, and now he is a preacher, a pastor, and an author, family man, and he is preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm super excited to have him on. Caleb, how are you doing today, man? Thank you for your time, and thank you for being with us.
Man, I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen, I want to dig in, and a lot of times whenever I have these interviews or I watch interviews, a lot of times they spend first 10, 15 minutes with a lot of fluff. I don't want to do that. I want to respect my viewers' time and your time as well. So I want to dig in, and I just want to ask some questions that I think that naturally, as I've framed all of this already, people are probably wondering, and I want to give you free reign. Don't feel like you have to sugarcoat your answers. You can answer them as thoroughly as you need to kind of paint the picture. But the first question that I really want to ask, and I'm sure people are wondering, is, whoa, wait a second. Whoa, slow down, rewind, bring it back. Like, what exactly were the dynamics of your family? How did that all come about in terms of your parents being LGBT? And, I saw an interview with you where you were explaining all of this when you came out with your other book, Messy Grace. But give us how in the world did that even happen to where you're now being raised by 3 gay parents?
Well, my parents were, my mom and dad were professors at the University of Missouri, Columbia. Taught things like philosophy, law, rhetoric, so on and so forth, literature. And when I was 2, they divorced, and they both went into same-sex relationships. And so my dad had several friends, but my mom was in a 22-year monogamous relationship with a woman named Vera, who was a psychologist. And they moved to Kansas City, Missouri. And my dad stayed in Columbia, and so I spent my whole childhood going back and forth between the 2 houses, but being raised in the LGBTQ community. And my mom and her partner were also activists. They joined the local board of directors of GLAAD. When I was growing up, they took me with them to bars and clubs and parades and campouts and house parties and everything else. And I saw the ugliness of some Christians there. I remember in one pride parade, I saw a bunch of Christians throwing water and urine on people and saying, "This is what Jesus thinks of you." And I remember what my mom said, "Caleb, these are Christians. If you are not like them, they will not like you." And I saw this proved over and over again when families would ignore their young sons dying of AIDS. And I thought to myself, I never want to be a Christian, because if this is how Christians are, I can't imagine how awful Jesus was. So that was the environment that I grew up in.
Wow. So I guess I'm wondering, when your parents got married, and you may or may not know this, but whenever they were dating, did they ever have some sense that they were struggling with same-sex attraction while they were dating? Was this something that maybe was in their past that maybe they didn't know about, or they dabbled in it maybe before they met each other? And because it just seems really odd that 2 people who are seemingly heterosexual, they decide to get married, have a child, and then not one of them but both of them go off into having same-sex attraction and actually being in same-sex relationships.
So my mom, I've asked her about that. She's never really said one way or another. What really, and I'm not saying that she wasn't same-sex attracted, but what really united her and her partner was the way that they had been treated by men throughout their life, friends and family members. And obviously, we don't have time to go into all that. But if I told you, and I'm sure you understand what I mean, I would probably hate men too if I was her, and I had those experiences. I could see how somebody could easily get there. My dad, on the other hand, said that he had always, from when he was young, felt same-sex attracted, but he grew up in a small Kansas town, and he just knew that that was not accepted. So, he said he went the route that he thought was acceptable to everybody else.
Okay. So I may have missed this when you said this, but so I know that your mother was in you said 22-year monogamous relationship, and then your dad, was he just coming out as this, okay, this is who I am, or did he actually get into a relationship with another man? Was that?
He was more in the closet. He had a lot of friends. Different guys that he would date here and there, but he never had a monogamous relationship with any other man after he was divorced from my mother.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. So I guess my next question would be, you are literally immersed in this culture of sexual freedom and LGBT, and if you don't mind me asking, it might be personal, but was there ever a time in your childhood where you may have questioned your own sexuality, your, experienced same-sex attraction? Because after all, you're in an environment where it's not only present, but it's celebrated. And that was going to be another question. Did your parents ever kind of push it on you or try to encourage you to explore? Or was it more of like, hey, this is our thing, this is our life, but this shouldn't be yours or doesn't need to be yours? Or what was that dynamic like?
So I have never experienced same-sex attraction ever. I've always been attracted to women. I'm married to a beautiful bonita Latina, and so that's just, I've always experienced opposite sex attraction. But and my dad never really ever talked to me about it that much. But my mom, every now and then, actually probably even more than every now and then, would tell me as I was growing up, now, Caleb, if you are gay, that's okay. Caleb, do you feel gay? If you are, that's okay. And it always kind of felt like she was just kept on fishing and fishing to see if I was. And I would always tell her, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I've never had those feelings. No. And eventually she stopped asking. But there was a season there when I was growing up where she would really ask me that again and again and again and again and again. And I don't know if that was just kind of out of trying to feel like maybe she wasn't alone in the family, because she didn't know about my dad at this time. I don't know if that was because she really wanted to help me if I was, or I don't know where that came from, but eventually it stopped. So that was kind of how I grew up with that. Other than that, I didn't feel any real pressure. I did, however, build up a lot of animosity towards Christians, and that really came out when I was about 16 and a sophomore in high school.
Yeah. We're going to delve into that a little bit more in terms of your conversion story, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. So, and now might be a good time to get into that. But before we get into that, in terms of you're growing up in this environment where, it's so different than the majority of people are growing up in terms of having, two opposite sex parents. How did you somehow form your theology or your philosophy or your worldview, if you will, about marriage? You say you're happily married now to, your wife. How do you go from, okay, this is what I've been raised with, this is what seems, I don't know if it ever was normal to you. I don't know if what you saw growing up was that you felt was normal, or at some point did you realize, okay, this is actually not normal? But how did you get to a place where you realized that this is not of God, it's not normal, and this isn't something that I want for my marriage? You said you're attracted to women, but yeah.
Yeah. So For me, it was my reality. So I guess in that sense, it was normalized. But when I would go to school, elementary age, middle school, and so on, I would always hear other kids talk about their mom and dad, or just they live with only their mom, or they only live with their dad. I never heard anybody talk about their mom and their mom. And growing up in Missouri, even though Columbia, Missouri is more of a progressive town, I guess you could say, city, I really knew that I was different. I felt like, man, if anybody found out about, my parents' relationships and so on, that I would get in trouble with them, like, as in being made fun of or bullied or whatever like that. So I never, ever talked about my parents really. And to me, it wasn't because I felt like they were doing something wrong at that time. To me, it was because I didn't want to be made to feel any more different than what I had already felt. I didn't want to feel rejection. And I think that's what a lot of us are afraid of. As a matter of fact, every human. I think we do a lot of things to try to put off the feeling of rejection. And so for me, I would never invite somebody over to my houses. However, I would go over to other kids' house for sleepovers or hangouts or that kind of thing. And people would say, hey, why don't you ever invite me over? And I'm like, you don't want to come over. Trust me, you don't want to. This and that, you don't want to. But how I came up with my theology really is linked to how I came to Christ. When I was 16, like I said, I hated Christians, and a friend of mine who was in high school with me invited me to a Bible study that he led for high schoolers. And I thought, this is going to be perfect. I'm going to go and be a pretend Christian, a ninja Christian, and I'm going to dismantle their faith. And obviously that turned out real well, as you can tell. That turned out great. I remember I showed up there, and if any of your people who are watching or have ever been in a Bible bookstore, they'll understand. And if this describes somebody's house who's watching or listening, I'm so sorry. I'm really not trying to offend you. I'm just telling you how it felt as an unchurched, unbelieving kid who was 16 walking into a Christian household. These people, it looked like they raided a Bible bookstore. Like they just picked it up and dropped it in their house. They had Christian breath mints. Like, I don't know if you knew that we had our own breath mints, testaments.
Yes,
they
I remember
had
those.
they had all the Bible bookstore pictures on the wall. And I just thought to myself, this is weird. I've never seen somebody have a framed picture of an animal they don't own, like a sheep with Bible verses, or a lion, or a kid lying down playing with a cobra near a sheep and a lion. I'm like, are we going to sacrifice a chicken? And then somebody came from the basement and said, we're studying downstairs. Why don't you come down and join us? And I thought, well, this is the beginning of a horror movie. And so we went down there and circled up, and we were, reading, and they asked me to turn to 1 Corinthians, and I couldn't find it because I didn't know that God put a table of contents in the Bible at that time. So I went to 1 Chronicles, and when they got to me, I read a verse about some dude getting impaled. Like, I didn't think that they would even notice, and they're like, well, I don't think that's Paul. Where are you? You're in 1 Chronicles? So I said, yeah. They're like, oh, that's in the Old Testament. And I said, so is there a new one? If that's the old, is there updated 2.0? And I kept on going back, but I really learned that Jesus had very deep theological convictions, and he had very real expectations as to how his followers should live their lives. But he also had very personal relationships with people who are nothing like him. And I really started falling in love with Jesus. And I started studying what the Bible had to say about sexuality, intimacy, relationships, so on and so forth. And I just couldn't deny it. I came to two conclusions that I still hold today. The first one is that I believe that I believe that God created sexual intimacy and affection to be expressed in a marriage between one man and one woman. But I also believe that theological convictions are never catalysts to devalue another human being. That what we believe about Jesus should cause us to be all the more relentless in our pursuit of other people and to love them well and to help them find Jesus. And then I had to come out as a 16-year-old Christian to my 3 gay parents. And when I did, they kicked me out of the house. So that was an interesting time in my life. But I could not get enough of Jesus, and I just kept on reading the Bible, reading.
No, wow. Thank you for sharing such a thorough reply. So So when you say they kicked you out of the house at 16, I'm assuming you're still in high school. Where did you go? I mean, did you have family members you stayed with? Was it a temporary thing where they kicked you out for a while and then you came back or home, or was it just something you stayed with somebody for a couple of years and then you went to college, or what happened there?
I was attending a church student ministry, a church youth group at the time, and I had friends there, so I stayed with several different friends during that time, and stayed in their home until my parents finally let me back in. And when I speak at student conferences or even college events, and I'll, tell a little bit about this story, but I won't tell that part, I'll inevitably almost always have students come up to me and they'll say, "You have no idea what it's like to be rejected. You have no idea what it's like to come out and be kicked out and to be oppressed." Like, yes, they use that word, oppressed. And I'm like, actually, I do. And I tell them my story, and they're like, "Oh, that's trippy. That's kind of cool." But they're like, "I had no clue that, LGBTQ parents would do that." And I'm like, well, sure they would, because fear is a human thing. It's not a Christian thing. It's not a gay thing. It is a human thing. We naturally fear whatever we don't understand or what we feel threatens us. And contrary to what some people say, I don't think fear is a bad thing. If somebody says fear is bad, they're a moron. Fear is not bad. If you're hiking and you see a mountain lion, you should have a healthy dose of fear, which I don't hike and I don't go into the woods because bad things happen to people in the woods. But if you see a grizzly bear, you should be afraid. But here's when fear becomes toxic. When it starts leading the direction of our lives and determining how we treat people, then that's toxic fear and it's sinful. And the key to that is God, who is all sovereign, all knowing, all powerful, completely loving, that we lean into our relationship with him and we get to know people. We learn about an idea. Even if we don't agree with it, we learn about it. And we trust that God has a plan, that he's carrying it out. And we trust that the end of the book of Revelation is true. In the end, God wins.
Yeah. So while you were kicked out of your parents' home, I don't know how long that lasted, but I mean, you're in high school. You need to have some connection with your parents. You have decisions to make with regard to college. What was the dynamic like, and how long were you banished from your home before they let you come back? And then what was the dynamic, with you coming back? Was there some sort of, meeting of the minds, or was it just like, we're going to let you stay here, but we're not really going to, pour into you? And what did that?
I think they honestly missed me. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, what's not to miss about this? This is eye candy right here, Alan. I have no idea what's not to miss about that.
I don't know.
But I think that they really started to miss me. And, of course I missed them. I was hurt, but I missed them. But really studying, I just studied as much about Jesus in the Bible as I could. And I really learned that a relationship with Jesus gives you the power to love the unlovable and forgive the unforgivable. I really think that there are some things that we can't forgive in and of our own power, but when you lean into your relationship with Jesus, he can lend you his power to be able to forgive that which you could not on your own. And at 16, that was a big deal for me to forgive my parents for that. And I think that would be a big deal for anybody. But eventually they did let me back in, and it was a cold reception. It wasn't like the prodigal son returning home or anything like that. But eventually they warmed up a little bit, and went into my junior and my senior year. I had also gotten baptized without them knowing it. It was like a CIA covert operation. And I had decided that I wanted to be a pastor. And so when I had told them that, they were not big fans of that either. That went over as well as a lead balloon would. They just wanted, nothing. They thought you're going to wind up homeless and starving on the streets, and you're not going to make anything of yourself or anything like that. And I'm like, well, I think God has me. They're like, oh, you can't use God has, cliche. And I'm like, well, I'm not using it as a cliche. I really feel like this is what he wants me to do. So that was the dynamic. And when I tried to share the gospel with them, I did not do it in the best way when I first got saved. Now, again, that was mainly because, I really didn't know how to share the gospel or anything like that. I was trying, at least I was trying. But I didn't know some of the things I knew now. And so that added to some of the frustration as well.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so that's actually a perfect segue. So, all right, you graduate from high school, you say you want to be a pastor, and you go off to, I'm assuming, Bible college and or college in general. Tell us a little bit about that, and then I know ultimately, I don't want to steal your thunder, spoiler alert, but I know that something very special happens in the lives of your parents, and just tell us a little bit about when that happened and how that happened and the reaction and all of that. So kind of fast forward us a little bit into your college years and when, and beyond.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking about that. Yeah, I went to Bible college in Southern Missouri. And one of the great things about going to Bible college in Southern Missouri is you have all these small churches just all around the college that you're able to go and preach in. And so I preached in a lot of different churches. The first church I ever preached in was like 5 people. The youngest one was 60. They wanted me to start a youth group of, yeah, there you go.
Yep.
The youngest one was 60. I think they wanted me to start a youth group of 40-year-olds. I don't know. And then I started preaching at a church that I think was the largest, excuse me, church per capita at the time. There were 50 people in the town. We had 25 of them in our church. I mean, we had half our town won for Christ. Should have written a book then or something. But went there for 18 months, preached, and then one Sunday I brought my mom. And I had talked in my sermons about my mom and my dad and how I was hoping they would come to the Lord. And eventually I brought my mom, and she thought the singing was weird because we didn't have a piano player or anything like that at the time. Our piano player died. Nobody else in the church knew how to play the piano, so there you go. But the next Sunday when I showed up, there were 2 elders waiting for me on the doorstep, and they said, if we want to talk to you real quick. And I said, sure, what's up? And they said, if you want to keep preaching here, don't you ever bring somebody like your mother again. We don't like those people. And I said, well, I don't like you, which I'm not sure I should have said that, but that's what I said at the time. And I said, I quit. And they're like, oh, you can't quit. We need you to preach. I said, oh, you don't want that. You do not want me to preach after this conversation. They're like, no, we need a sermon. I said, well, you're going to get one. It's kind of like that old Bon Jovi song. If you're going to go down on Blaze of Glory. If you remember that song, Blaze of Glory. And,
yes, I do.
Man, I went up there and I'd written a sermon on fasting. I ripped it up. Fasting is one of my least favorite subjects. And I started preaching about grace and truth and compassion and conviction. I walked out of there and I'm like, Lord, if you ever give me the chance to lead a church, I want a church filled with messy, broken people. People who are using, people who are bankrupt, people who have all the money in the world, people who are not Christians, people who think that they've been Christians since God was a boy, people who are drinking, people who have been divorced 5 times, so on and so forth, because that's what the church is. The church is a beautiful mosaic of messy, broken, surrendered lives that God unites together to glorify himself. And I said, man, that's the church that I want to lead. And so when I graduated, I went to work at a church out in Los Angeles, California, where I live now, and was there for 11 years, got married to my wife, and she's beautiful. In her wildest dreams, she had no clue that her knight in shining armor looked like a cross between Dr. Evil, Uncle Fester, and Gru, right here. And so then I ended up going to preach at a church in Dallas, Texas for 3.5 years. And then I moved back to Southern California in the summer of 2013. But my parents both moved down to Dallas, Texas to be closer to our family in 2011. My mom's partner had died from cancer. And when they moved down there separately with one another, they said, can we start attending your church? And I said, you want to attend my church? You know what I believe about sexuality and intimacy and so on and so forth? And they said, yeah. And the church treated them well. People disagreed with them about their views, but treated them well. So well that in the summer of 2013, before we moved back to Southern California, my parents at the ages of 69 and 70 gave their lives to Jesus Christ.
Wow. What a blessing and what a testimony about what God's grace can do in the lives of broken and messy people. But what a sad commentary on how, unfortunately, many churches, many Christians view how we are supposed to relate to those in the LGBT community. So, wow. Okay. So this was 2013. Your parents are now saved, sanctified, filled with the Holy Ghost, all that good stuff. So how now do they proceed as it relates to their views on sexuality as well as their practice of it? Obviously your mother's partner passed away. Is she convinced now that, hey, I may still have these attractions, but I'm not going to act on them because Christ doesn't want me to? And then what about your dad? Where are they at in what you would consider their faith and their practice as it relates to same sex?
Yeah, that's a great question. My parents, when they became Christian, they're still same-sex attracted. I don't know that necessarily goes away. Maybe it does for some people. I don't know. I've never met somebody to whom it does. But they chose not to act on their desires or their attraction. They didn't go back in other relationships or anything like that. They don't believe everything I do, but they believed in Jesus. They went to church when they could. They went to Bible study when they could. My dad is out here in assisted living in the Los Angeles area right now, and he's had dementia, which is turning into Alzheimer's. So that's difficult. And then my mom, she still lives in Dallas, Texas, and so I fly down there about once a month, sometimes twice a month, for the day to go see her in her assisted living, and then I'll fly back in the evening.
And you and I will get lunch next time you come here, right?
Absolutely. We'll get lunch, breakfast, dinner, whatever you want. But yeah, I'm in Dallas once or twice a month seeing her, and she's got cancer for the second time. It's not going well. She's got a lot of other health issues. She's in assisted living too. But I do have no doubt that my parents are saved. And it's because of a community of people at a church that were willing to love people that were different from them, that made all the difference in the world. Because I asked them when they first got saved, and I'm summarizing my conversations with both of them. But I'm like, what did it? And I'm expecting an apologetics type answer or philosophical, theological answer. But here's what they said. People treated us like people, not like projects. People treated us like individuals, not like an idea. People were able to distinguish between the ideas that they had and the opinions and the views that they had from the actual individual that's created in the image and likeness of God. People were able to believe that everybody is somebody that God created and Jesus died for. And that made all the difference in the world in how they treated my parents. And when they were loved by a bunch of other messy people, it made it possible for my parents to believe more and more. If these people love me and they love Jesus and Jesus loves them, maybe that means that God can love me too.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue into, this discussion about the church and LGBT. Where is the church missing the mark when it relates to LGBT? Why does it seem like that community, I don't want to say hates the church, but feels as though the church hates them? Is it more of a church issue? Is it more of an individual Christian issue? Like both. Where's the church missing the mark as it relates to how we engage the LGBT community? I don't know if I should be putting the Q on it. Should I be putting the LGBTQ, or I'm not sure.
I think either way is fine.
Okay, right.
Either way is fine. Yeah.
So how are we missing the mark, and what advice would you give to not only the church, but individual Christians as we engage this topic? And let me frame it a little bit different. Essentially, how do we at the same time balance two truths, right? The truth of a high standard of morality, a high standard of theological truth as it relates to God's design for sexuality, and sharing in God's disgust of that, right? As opposed to, okay, on the other hand, there's this truth of love that I've got to balance, that I always have to hold in tension with one another. What's a good healthy tension? I know that's something that you do a lot with with your organization, and you travel and speak on it a lot and help churches and consult. But what advice do you give them on this?
Yeah. So first thing that I try to help people understand is, and thankfully a lot of people do understand this that I talk to, or at least they understand it to a certain point. And I think I'm growing in my understanding of this. I'm sure you are. I'm sure everybody is. But everybody has the same equal intrinsic value, because everybody is somebody that God created and Jesus died for. That's huge for us to understand. That when it comes to God's love, there's no hierarchy. That's the first thing. The second thing is to understand that Christianity is a faith of tension. Now, there are absolutes in Christianity, 100%. There's a God, Jesus is his son, God is triune, the Bible is inspired, Jesus is our vicarious substitutionary atonement, we're saved by grace through faith in Christ alone, so on and so forth. But there's also areas in Christianity, as I know you would believe, that there's tension. And one of those tensions we see in John 1:14 and 17, that says that Jesus Christ came in both grace and truth. Now, most people, even unbelievers, we're either naturally about the grace or naturally about the truth. But, if you take sides, you're acting unchristlike. You have to stand for both. I don't have a rubber band, but I have a mask that's kind of like a rubber band that I'll use here. That you have some people, they're all about the grace but no truth. It's like holding a rubber band by one side. There's no strength or power. And then if you say I'm all about the truth but no grace, it's like holding a rubber band by one side. There's no power. So where's the power? Well, when you say I'm about the grace and the truth, where does the power lie? The power lies in the tension of the two. And you feel this tension because it's uncomfortable. If it was comfortable, it would be called something else. But we feel this tension when our friends make decisions, but we believe the Bible says this, or we're struggling with this, and God says this, or, my parents over here are going to do this, but Jesus says to do this. And the reason why we take sides is because it's spiritual laziness. It takes no effort on my part to be all about the truth if that's naturally what I'm about, or all about the grace if that's naturally what I'm about. But it takes all the effort and dependence on God to stretch over to the other side. And there's a name for this tension. It's love. You see, I believe that love is the tension that we feel between grace and truth. And I tell people all the time, if you don't like tension, then you don't understand Christianity. And again, we experience tension here in our sinful, fallen, broken world as we're stuck in the arena of time. To God, there's no tension. None. He understands it perfectly. But for us, we experience it. Like, we believe in one God, but the Trinity. You ever hear some of those examples of the Trinity? They're awful,
yeah.
Right? Doesn't catch it.
Let me see if I can remember the ice and the water and the steam. And
oh yeah,
there's a few of them that and people are well-meaning whenever they bring them up.
Oh, they're well-meaning.
They really are. They think that, hey, I've got one. Look, have you ever heard of the ice and water and steam, and it's all the same substance but three different. I'm like, that sounds a little bit like modalism.
Get it? Yeah, it doesn't get it. I had one friend who described God as an egg. You have the egg yolk and the egg white and the egg shell, and I'm like, don't ever do that again. God is not an egg. That's just awful. But we believe in the Bible is inspired by God, written by people. We believe that you have to lose your life to find it. We believe that Jesus is fully God, fully human. We believe that death and evil were defeated at the cross, not yet destroyed. And we sense this tension. We want to run away from it, but we have to learn to live in this tension of both grace and truth. And then I try to help churches understand some other things, like there's a difference between acceptance and agreement. Acceptance is about loving everybody no matter what. It's what Jesus talks about in Matthew 5:38-48. What the Apostle Paul talks about in Romans 13:8-10, that loving your neighbor fulfills the law, which that, of course, is more binding than all the 613 commands in the law. But loving your neighbor fulfills the law. It's learning how to forgive your enemies so that you can love your enemies. As Martin Luther King said, we cannot love somebody we have not forgiven. And so acceptance is about loving somebody where they are no matter what. But we're commanded to do that. We're not commanded to agree. There's a big difference between acceptance and agreement. And when people see LGBTQ or sexuality as their main identity, they cannot distinguish between acceptance and agreement, because anytime you say something or try or disagree with a view that they have that's connected to LGBTQ or their sexuality, they see that as an attack. And then I try to get people to think deeper about people, but not different about theology. Because unfortunately, there are a lot of churches that are giving into this whole movement of progressive Christianity right now and really thinking, well, I need to change my views if I want to keep the relationship. And that's just sad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. What you point out is it's so many Christians have a difficult time accepting, and it's almost as if, well, if I accept this person, that means I'm also approving and accepting of their behavior, and so I don't want to accept them, because if I do, then I'm pretty much accepting their lifestyle as well. And I love the way you put it. It's like, hey, I'm accepting you as an individual who has been made in the imago Dei, the image of God, right? But that doesn't mean that I have to approve, like, or agree with the lifestyle that you're living. But even if I said that, wouldn't that still be somewhat offensive to an LGBT? Because I've heard the phrase, love the sinner, hate the sin, or whatever it is, hate the sin and love the sinner. I've heard that that's just about as offensive as trying to prove that God is an egg, right? It's like, don't ever say that to someone in that community. Like, we love the sin, we love you, but we hate your sin. From what I've gathered, that many of them, they don't see it as like separate. Like, well, if you hate the sin, that means you hate me because that's who I am. So maybe talk a little bit about that, that whole phrase, and how do they interpret that? Love the sinner and hate the sin type of thing.
Yeah, I never say that to anybody. And I understand the well-intentioned motive behind that statement. But I don't say it for a few reasons. Number one, it's because we can't perfectly do that. Only God is the only one that can perfectly do that. Love the sinner, hate the sin. And of course we should hate sin. But when we say that to somebody, especially somebody who identifies as LGBTQ, because there's a difference between somebody who relates to LGBTQ and somebody who identifies as LGBTQ. Those who identify as LGBTQ, in my view, are individuals who have made that their main worldview, who have made that what their hill they're going to live, die, stand on. They cannot distinguish between themselves and that identity. There are people in same-sex marriages or same-sex relationships who relate to LGBTQ. I mean, in my estimation, because they don't see it as their main identity. They see it as a marriage, but that is not the most important thing about them. That is not what they want to be known for. But it's the individuals that are the extremists, that are the activists, that is their main identity, that they can't distinguish. And that's what makes it extremely difficult as we try to relate, as we try to share the gospel. And when you say to somebody, hey, love the sinner, hate the sin, you're right, they really can't tell the difference between the two. And I think some of that might be, just what the Apostle Paul says, that I think when we do accept Christ, we do have some kind of a spiritual understanding. 1 Corinthians 2:14-15, the Spirit helps us to understand spiritual things. There are some things that we will not really understand unless we have faith. And so I think that's one of those things that are difficult. So I try to say it in other ways. Like say, hey, I love people, and that love is based on my, acceptance of you, not my agreement with you. Because love that is based on acceptance is deep. It is long-lasting love. Love that is based on agreement, that's cheap love.
Mm-hmm. And I love how you put that. Here's a question that I've always wondered about, and I'll be honest with you. I'm just being transparent with everybody watching, is that I've always struggled with this. And then we'll get into another question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. But, if I'm a heterosexual male, which I am proudly, and I am trying to befriend or reach out to or disciple somebody who is already struggling with same-sex attraction, maybe has acted out on it or whatnot, I'll be honest with you, I'm already immediately uncomfortable in that situation, because it's not like talking to one of my other male friends that I know that they're straight. I know that they are heterosexual. So there's no fear that somebody's going to have feelings for the other person or start to feel connected. And that's always been my struggle, is that, hey, I would love to, reach out and share with somebody who is LGBT, but but also I don't want to risk the fact that, there could be, if they're already attracted to same sex, I don't want the discomfort of knowing that there might be some attraction they have for me, right? And it just gets kind of weird like that. And even with women, I could imagine it might be even worse, because I know women connect in different ways and things like that, and they're much more touchy-feely than we are. And so it's like, okay, is she touching me like just like one of my female friends, or is that like a touch of like she's attracted to me now? And it just gets weird. So like that dynamic has always been hard for me to balance when you talk about tension, right? My tension is, I should probably reach out to this person, but then I don't want the weird feelings. Have you ever dealt with that?
I know what you're talking about. And so here's probably the difference between you and me, Alan, and the difference between me and a lot of people. I have never had a woman or a man throw themselves at me, ever. Never had that happen. That's never been an issue that I've had to struggle with. I just haven't. Now, again, and I'm not trying to make light of it too much, but I do think it's funny.
Well, you're assuming that I have.
Well, no. I mean, come on.
I'm just joking.
Look. When I get up to heaven, I'm getting my Matthew McConaughey body. That's what God and I have talked about. In 1 Corinthians 15, I've lived my whole life looking like Dr. Evil. What am I going to do? Okay. Now, here's the thing, though. There are a lot of Christian guys who are worried about this. And guess what? There are a lot of guys that are not attractive to members of the opposite sex. So if you're not attractive to members of the opposite sex, what makes people think you're going to be attractive to people of the same sex? So there are probably a lot of your listeners. I know I'm insulting many of them, but I'm insulting myself, so join the ranks. There are a lot of your listeners, you don't have anything to worry about, okay? Nobody's beating down the door. But on the other hand, there are times when I know friends who have experienced that, and somebody does have feelings and those kind of develop, and then they don't know what to do because they don't want to reject the person. So my advice would be, and I know this is stuff you already do and your listener or viewers probably already do, but I really think that as we think about this, we should, number one, try not to assume that they're attracted to us. But then number two, if we do begin to suspect that they are, I think that obviously we have to be very, very careful in how much time we're with someone, if we're with them alone, so on and so forth. And that's not because we think somebody's going to make a move on us. That's because we don't want to lead somebody on, and we want to be completely clear in our understanding and our view of the relationship, that kind of thing. They might, I've had friends that they've had a gay friend bring it up to them, say, I am attracted to you, and they've had to tell them in very gracious and kind words, I'm sorry, I'm not attracted to people of the same sex. That's not who I am. That's not what I'm, what I'm attracted to. And those are difficult conversations, but it's important when you have a conversation like that, to reinforce the love. Say, look, I am not attracted, to people of the same sex, but at the same time, you got to understand that I care about you as a friend very deeply, and I would not have spent this time with you if I did not care about you. So I don't want you to mistake the fact that I'm not attracted to you for the fact that I don't care about you. And I think that trying to drive home that phileo love or that agape love is so incredibly important, because we live in a society that overemphasizes feelings and reactions and underemphasizes logic and truth. When it was Augustine who said that the two must go hand in hand, the mind and will should never be put at odds with each other. And so I think that we need to emphasize the fact that we do love them, because our society also emphasizes, because they emphasize feelings so much, they emphasize the fact that eros love, out of the different loves that C.S. Lewis talked about, that eros love is the highest form of love, when that's not true. Agape, phileo, strake, they are, I think, deeper and can be deeper than even eros love. And when you think about it, all three of those loves will be in heaven. Eros love will not be in heaven, you know? And so we spend so much of our time talking about that when we should be developing these other loves where we can experience intimacy at a good level, even though it's not Eros.
Yeah. Awesome. Last question before we talk about what you're doing now, how people can support you. You got a book coming out. Love for you to talk into that. But before we do, just one last piece of advice. You got some people out here that are watching this video right now, and no doubt, just sheer from the numbers, they are struggling. They're struggling with either same-sex attraction or same-sex, they're acting out on it. They're confused about their sexuality, or maybe some of them have just straight up come out already and they're watching this and they're just, they don't know. What would your advice be to that person, whether young or old, that it feels trapped, feels like there's no way I'm ever going to be normal according to the world standards. I'm not attracted to the opposite sex, and I don't want to be celibate my whole life. And it seems like a jail sentence that for either deny what I'm attracted to, which is same sex, or according to the Christian principle, that just means I now I have to fight these desires for the rest of my life. Maybe I'm 21 years old and I'm now thinking about being a Christian. I have to be celibate for the rest of my life because there's no guarantee that God's going to all of a sudden make me attracted to somebody who's of the opposite sex. And they feel trapped. Maybe internally they know they should get out. There's something in them that says, yeah, I should, but I just don't know how. And I'm afraid of the unknown. I don't know what's waiting for me on the other side. Speak into that a little bit, from the person that's watching, is what hope do they have? How can they get free from this? And what does that even look like? What does freedom even look like?
Thank you for asking that question. I think that's incredibly important. I think one of the first things that I think we need to drive home is the fact that no matter how you feel about yourself, you need to know that God loves you deeply. And God doesn't only love you, he really, really likes you. And that he is committed to you, and God will not be faithless with you. That's why Paul writes in the pastoral epistles that God cannot be unfaithful to you, because then he's unfaithful to himself. God is faithful. And so I think, first and foremost, I just want to say that. Second of all, whatever pain, uncertainty that you've experienced because of your orientation or what you perceive to be your orientation, I just want to say I'm so sorry. I can't imagine the frustration, the pain, and maybe even the loneliness that you have experienced. And it could be even the way that people treated you, and that is not okay. I just want you to know that. And even if it's some Christians that have treated you that way, please do not mistake the actions of some to speak for the totality of those of us who are Christians, and do not allow the actions of some to speak for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, or your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, if you're saved, because that is a lie that the enemy tells you, that everybody's like this, and they're just not. They're extremists in any community. I don't care what community it is, what group. You're always going to have extremists, and that kind of extremism, where you leverage people to try to make yourself feel better or make your point, that never leads to peace. So please understand that. The other thing I would say is that I understand what your desires might be telling you over and over and over again about who you're attracted to, what you feel, that kind of thing. My question is this: will you be willing to trust Jesus even if you disagree with him? Will you be willing to trust Jesus even if you disagree with him? Because your desires can make you feel like, I disagree. I think Jesus is wrong about this. I think Paul is wrong about this. But will you be willing to trust that Jesus and Paul knew what they were saying when they talked about marriage, when they talked about sexuality, when they talked about sex and relationships? Will you be willing to focus more on what you know than what you feel? I think that's also incredibly important. Not to say that feelings aren't important, but these are just so important. And please understand, I can't relate with this. I don't I don't pretend to imagine to know what you're going through, but I do know that this is a lonely road. And for that, I'm very, very sorry. But God created you not to be an island unto yourself, that you can find good and true community when you join a church, when you join a community, a Christian community that is Christ-centered, that is redemptive in nature. It may not be perfect. It won't be perfect. If it has good people in it, it's not going to be perfect. And if it is, you're going to mess it up when you join it, because nobody's perfect. But try to find one that is very, very authentic. People who love you for who you are. People that will love you even if you mess up. People who love you even when you disagree. Because when you find that, it's easier to find and follow Jesus, especially when you're with others. So that's some of the advice I would give.
Yeah. And I echo all of that because, I've never struggled with, same-sex attraction, thankfully, but I will, this is my advice I would give since I've, Caleb's given his advice and I'll add to that. And I know this isn't an example that a lot of people like to hear, but it is the reality that, and it's going to be a hard reality, that all of us, single, married, same-sex attracted, opposite-sex attracted, we all have a sin nature, and we all have to lay our sinful desires at the feet of Jesus. And what I mean by that is, don't think for a second that a heterosexual person who is happily married doesn't have sinful, ungodly desires that they have to go the rest of their life crucifying, right? You have a lot of men that are struggling with lust, and you all may have heard me say this before. When you're struggling with lust, typically there is a strong perceived need for frequency, and there's a strong perceived need for variety. Well, guess what, my friends? Marriage only solves one of those. Marriage doesn't solve the variety problem. It solves the frequency problem, or at least it should. In a healthy working marriage, it should solve the frequency problem. There should be an opportunity for you to frequently get your needs met. But if you're somebody that is struggling with, okay, I'm getting bored with my wife or my husband, and I want a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and she looks good, and she looks good too, and wow, and I'm curious about all these things. Guess what? None of us get a free exemption card to just act out on our ungodly desires. We all, no matter where you are, if you're a Christian, you have to daily, this isn't a monthly, weekly, yearly thing. This is an everyday, this is actually a moment by moment decision that we have to crucify the sinful desires of our flesh and say, you know what, man, I love my wife, I think she's beautiful, but those 5 girls over there I see on the beach, they are gorgeous too. And boy, I sure have some thoughts about them. I can't go over there and talk to them, right? That's an ungodly desire that I have to lay down. So let me just encourage those who are struggling. I know it's a little bit different because at least for heterosexuals, we have the hope of getting some of our needs met through marriage. And I understand that. But just know that you're not alone in this journey of going through life and feeling as though there are desires that you've been told by God are not godly, and you have to lay them at the feet of Christ, because we're all in that struggle together.
I think that is so incredibly important, what you just said. And I love how you made the point. And I think, what you're saying, because all of us are sinful, there's not one person alive who is not sexually broken. The only person alive who is ever sexually broken, who is ever not sexually broken, was Jesus. Everybody else has been sexually broken. And I love your illustration about, we have these desires when we're married. Doesn't take away the desires. They're still there. But we also have to remember that we're not just being faithful to, our spouse, but also God, because a marriage is between us and him. So as much as I can't be unfaithful to my wife, whom I love very much, I don't want to be unfaithful to the Lord either, because he's just as much part of our marriage as she is.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. So Caleb, you've got a couple of books, one that just came out a little while back, and super excited about that. Tell me a little bit about, first of all, one of your previous books, Messy Grace, but maybe spend a little bit more time talking about your new book, Messy Truth, and then just kind of end by telling us how we can support you, your ministry, what you're doing, and how we can continue to pray for you.
Well, thanks, man. Yeah, my first book is called Messy Grace, and it came out in 2015, and it deals with a lot of the things that we've talked about. And in this book, I talk about an individual's personal relationship with LGBTQ friends and family. What do you do when somebody you love comes out to you? What about identity? How is identity wrapped up into this matter? How do we live in this tension of grace and truth? Do we try to balance it? Because I've never found that works. So what do we do? How do we move forward? And then just recently, August 10th, this book came out, Messy Truth, right here. It's I guess a sequel. I don't know if it'll be a trilogy, but it's a sequel to Messy Grace, and the subtitle is How to Foster Community Without Sacrificing Convictions. So whereas the first book is all about your personal relationships, the second book is about how do you help your LGBTQ friends and family get into a Christ-centered, redemptive community. Because again, I think that people find and follow Jesus better in community, not in isolation. So we talk a lot about community in this book. We go deeper into the idea of identity and even tension. I spent about a third of the book talking about how do you have a difficult conversation with somebody about truth without shaming them. Like, you don't compromise what you believe, but at the same time, how can we be intentional in what we say? As intentional as the Apostle Paul was in Acts 17, when he talked to the philosophers and preached to them in Acts, as opposed to how he preached to the Sanhedrin. So I'm currently one of the pastors on staff at Shepherd Church in the Los Angeles area. And that's in the Porter Ranch, Northridge, Chatsworth area. And then also I lead a ministry that I started called the Messy Grace Group, where I work with ministries, Christian colleges, and churches. I've been able to help about 4 Christian colleges and seminaries get out of lawsuits that they had pending, potential ones with LGBTQ students going in there, helping to mediate between the two. And then I primarily work with churches of all different sizes, from churches of church plants to churches of like 20 people, all the way up. I work with churches to 40,000 people, and helping them to develop systems and processes that will honor their values and doctrine, but also create room for LGBTQ people to attend. Because again, people find and follow Jesus better in community when they're able to hear the gospel, make new relationships. That's how they, I think, best find and follow Jesus in community. And if we create places where we can't invite our friends, then that's a big issue. And again, this is not about softening the word, compromising what Scripture says, not whatsoever. That it is not our job to make Scripture palatable. That is not our job. Our job is to love people well, no matter what, and to pave the way for them to be able to, meet Jesus. And so the website for that is messygracegroup.org. And then my personal website is just calebkaltenbach.com, but nobody can really ever spell my last name. So messygracegroup.org.
Awesome. Well, Caleb, guys, just so you know, the links to both books and his Instagram and you guys know how I do it by now, his Instagram, his ministry, his personal website, his church's website, and all those things are going to be linked below in the description of this video. And Caleb, just want to say thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very busy man. Thank you for hanging out today. And guys, do yourself a favor. Listen, if you are struggling, first and foremost, with same-sex attraction, or just in that space, or you find yourself consistently in the space where people are, LGBTQ people are running, and you're just struggling with, how do I relate? How do I answer questions? How do I be a Christian in the midst of my convictions? But how do I love this person? You're going to want to go and pick up those books. You will not be disappointed. I'm going to go get them myself because I want to learn more about how I can be a conduit of grace and an ambassador for Christ, because listen, this community, this LGBTQ community is not going anywhere anytime soon. And it is up to us to be able to learn how to love them and to be able to find the tension between grace and truth. So Caleb, thank you so much for your time, and any parting words that you want to share with our viewers?
Keep on watching the Alan Parr Show. Keep on watching The Beat. I love it, and look forward to grabbing lunch or dinner with you sometime soon.
Oh man, I love it, man. Thanks so much. And thank you all for hanging out today and taking the time out of your schedule to hang out with us. And hopefully you all were blessed by this discussion. I'll see you guys next time.